Thank you very much, Kim. So for a matter of introduction, my name is Darrell Jones. I've worked in the cybersecurity industry for about 28 years. I've been in a CISO or vCISO role now for the last 12. And as a consulting firm, the Wrigley Group helps companies who can't keep or desire to have a full-time CISO. We help them fulfill that role at the board level and in the strategy level. Derek, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Darrell. So I'm in a similar role, vCISO, run that line of service for Wolf and Company. We're based out of Boston, but have offices down in New Jersey and Springfield as well. I've been a IT and security geek for 25 plus years, and the last 10 or so years in a more of an information security officer, IT director, CISO role, and thoroughly enjoy it because of all the changes that happen nearly day to day, right? So
it's very stagnant as an industry. We're very stagnant, right?
So true.
Teza, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Darrell. I'm the CISO at ChargePoint, based out of Bay Area. For folks who don't know us, we are an electric infrastructure provider for the electric vehicle industry. Prior to ChargePoint, I've been in security privacy roles at Facebook, PayPal, Upwork. So close to 20 years of experience into ID security. So glad to be here.
Thanks for attending, Teza. So let's get into the meat of our conversation today. It's really about cybersecurity insurance. So Teza, I'm going to lead off with you. What has been your experience of how cybersecurity insurance has changed as far as getting it and the requirements of getting it for you and your organizations?
Yeah, kind of dating myself, but I think cyber insurance has gone through its own hyper cycle, right? There was a time probably like 10, 12 years back where we would have to justify why we needed a breach insurance or cyber insurance. I remember like going up to general counsel and kind of justifying that we need this. It was a huge ROI discussion. And now it's like, why don't we have this? So I've seen it like change through a massive cycle of do we need it to, we must have it. But also, I've also seen the issuers of insurance become way more cognizant and smarter around evaluating risk, how companies operate, things like that. So it's a lot of transition across cyber insurance over the last 10, 12 years.
That's great. I want to come back to that risk assessment part. Derek, what about you? What have you recognized the change or update in obtaining cyber insurance today?
Yeah, to play off what Teza said, that hypercycle is a great word for it. It's bubbled to the top. What I've really seen lately over the past year and a half, 2 years, is it's gone from a back room kind of discussion, maybe with finance, with legal. Now it is reaching across. We have to get IT involved. We have to get security involved. We need to know how HR is doing different pieces because they're starting to play into all those different areas because security's got to protect the people, the processes, and technology. So with that, that pitch now, more and more people are getting involved and having to be in that kind of committee now. So it's much more at the top of the list for sure.
Certainly. So Teza, you mentioned risk and the measurement of risk. Can you discuss some of the techniques you're encountering from the brokers and from the insurers about how they are measuring that risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I would say it's chapter one, like a couple of years back, it was more around what's your revenue, how many employees do you have, things like that. Are you global? The next phase was, do you have certifications? What kind of certifications you have, which gave them certain set of assurance that yes, this company takes security seriously. Now it's as detailed. I was going through one of the forms a couple of weeks back, and they wanted to know how long is our backups? How many days we keep our backups. So they're getting really into the weeds of what's their exposure. When we do our risk, is it more around, is it a checkbox exercise, or have we really looked at the pieces and said, okay, this is how deep this organization thinks about risk, both locally, globally. Third parties is a huge component now. They want to evaluate what's your exposure there. So it's a lot more diligent from that standpoint.
So I'm going to chime in on this one. I'm going to ask myself a question or to comment. But my experience is ticks and ties with your experience, Teza, and that is it started off with give me the certifications, et cetera. Now these due diligence questionnaires, are one just came across my desk that was 297 questions long. And to your point, the IT cyber section was only 67 questions. So 230 questions were to what Derek was talking about. How do you handle onboarding, offboarding vendors? How do you manage risk across the firm? How do you manage compliance? And I can't answer those things. So it goes back to, I got to pull everybody to a meeting. You got to sign this. And the third-party risk management that you mentioned it seems to be something of I want to call it an outlier or an outgrowth maybe, because I'm getting the same DDQs probably generated from the same third-party risk management platforms that the insurers are using. And I have to answer those same questions again. So it's not only our insurance providers, but it's our third parties. And I had, in part of my DDQ that I'm using as an example, was explain in detail how you manage third-party risk. Do you have a tool? Do you have DDQ? Do you have it? Do you take their policies? Do you take their procedures? I want examples. So it was, the in-depth was crazy. But the other thing that hit us, and I want to talk about this, is some of the proactive activities that insurers are currently doing. We were proactively scanned through Secure Scorecard and BitSight. Have you guys seen that? And how did you guys handle that information when it was presented to you?
So I'm seeing that, Darrell, from a little bit of a side to that. It was a function of a customer reaching out on behalf of another vendor that maybe had one in common, and conducted a similar type of scan. I wouldn't say it was BitSight or anything, but it was a kind of a newer product that they were using that really pulled in this compliance piece, this technology piece, anything they could see outside the perimeter that this company exposed. They couldn't see past the walls, the door, but anything that came out of the window of the door that was, in scope for being looked at. And that then system apparently pulls it in and grades it and calculates risk based on many, many factors and algorithms that they use. But it was unique and eye-opening because that is, that's another service area, another, kind of platform that people can use now as part of their vendor management program. And maybe it'll be fourth party, not just third party. So it's interesting to see that changing too.
Well, that was going to be, you mentioned fourth party. And if you read, much of these, and I'm sure you guys have read as many of these insurance policies as I have, is they indemnify themselves from fourth party risks. They're very clever about that. But then in the DDQs, they're asking us how we manage third and fourth party risk. So the conversation is starting to change. Okay, you're asking us these questions, you're measuring our capabilities to measure, monitor, and mitigate this risk, but you're indemnifying yourself from the risk. So there doesn't seem to be equitability there, right? So I have a question about so Teza, have you ever had a security broker or insurance broker do one of these third-party scans against your platform and give you the results?
We had it, and I would say I have a mixed opinion about this whole exercise because some of these organizations who scan you are not independent, so you now are working with them to update your ratings. It's sometimes it's not as crystal clear as to what are those levers that you have to change to start modifying it. When do they come back and scan you, things like that, right? So yeah, I've had that experience where I was given that rating. We were prepared for it. We were using one of the vendors that you mentioned earlier. It came from a different vendor than that. So
Right. It's the same space.
Yeah. So we had to write, like with our legal team, write up a document around why we disagree or agree with some of that and how we have countermeasures in place and what do we do. So,
well, it's like a reputation protection, right? If you're getting a bad grade, you want to go and justify.
Exactly. It's like my FICO score.
Well, that's precisely one of these vendors basically has a FICO score.
Yeah.
And I bring up this I bring it up, to add a little bit. My challenge was the insurance agency did their work and did their due diligence, and they have their right to do that. But they presented it to our GC, they presented it to head of risk who doesn't understand what they're looking at, and all they see are critical, F. And to your point, now I'm in this is really not right. This isn't important. This is a false positive. And then, oh my goodness, maybe that one's real, right? But there is some value to it. But what we found was it was more overhead at the end of the day than the actual value that it actually brings. Because we had to teach, how do you tell your GC that TLS 1.0 is really not that bad, and just because they give you an F on the TLS score doesn't mean that we're actually at risk, right? It's very difficult like that. Yeah. So that actually leads me into the next phases. So we've talked about, okay, we're going to go get it. We talked about some of the challenges and some of the things to look out for when you go get it. We're not even talking about doing multiple bids and all that. That's just standard operating procedure. But now you get it. And Derek, why don't you walk us through, once you have it, what have you seen? Who owns it? How does it, affect the business? Or is it a set and forget thing? Why don't you give me some of your background on that?
Yeah, when the insurance is in-house at this point in the policy set, the interesting parts I see are the owners being different. Every organization, one organization could have finance own it. One organization could have GC or legal, that area own it. It could be an HR function even, depending on the size and scope of the organization. Now, the interesting part is that if an issue arises and you have to enact an incident response or it affects business continuity, not everybody understands who owns it. It's not very clear that, hey, if something happens, so-and-so owns the cyber insurance, and we need to bring it into the mix here because there are functions in there that we could leverage to help in our situation. Sure. Especially when it comes to a claim, but that's a whole nother conversation too.
Correct.
So that's what I see, is that muddy or less clear visibility into who really owns it and what they need to do about it and do with it. Where to keep it, in a filing cabinet somewhere? Is it on, SharePoint system that could go down? Like, how are you going to, leverage it and use it appropriately?
Great. Teza, would you have anything to add on that topic?
Yeah, exactly. The other way, I have used this, right? You buy this and you kind of forget, right? But usually when these enterprise contracts, like we are selling our services to our customers, and they have these massive liability clauses in there with respect to incidents. So right. I look at that number, I'm like, does this fit with my other piece here? Like, does it fit with my cybersecurity insurance that I've had? So I usually use it, but again, it's when you come into a new role as a CISO and you're trying to, one of the first things is, do we have cybersecurity insurance? And somebody scans you and you've not even had a chance to put in the first steps of your program, and you're getting these F ratings, as you mentioned. So you're dealing with multiple streams here. Yeah.
So I actually missed a very, very important step in the first part when we were talking about obtaining, is how much do you get? And when you were talking about when you start getting third parties and you're getting into contractual liability with services provided, do you guys have any advice on how you score how much you really need? I have ideas, but I don't want to take the floor. I'll let you guys go first.
Goodness, you could almost just use Excel and put your most common requested amounts of cyber insurance from your highest grossing or highest netting customers or clients, and then do an average, and hopefully you can obtain enough that way. There really is no super slick formula at this point, because you're getting different pressures from different companies to carry a certain amount.
Right.
And it could swing wildly, right? You could have one far end of multi-million and another end of just, hundreds of thousands, that's a big gap.
Oh, it's a monster. How about you, Teza? What's your experience on how to size it?
Yeah, it's kind of, in a lot of cases, finger in the wind.
Right.
It is kind of that, unfortunately, right? But I think there are now ways to hone in more. As Derek said, we can look at how many customers do we have, what kind of liability could we have in case something breaks, and then it's about GDPR has helped a little bit around defining fines, so you could use that as an input as well to say this is my exposure, these are our records in Europe, things like that. So I use some of that now to come up with a ballpark number. I don't have it dotted to a science.
Right.
Say this is exactly where we are. Yeah.
So, Teza, you and I headed down the same path, right? You have California's CCPA and GDPR, and the Digital Privacy Rights Act in New York, et cetera. So I started with the records. How many records do we have, right? You're going to pay off by record and based on type. So that was one input. The second input, which I actually was guided to by somebody with far more experience in this space than I, he said, ask your business how much money they would lose every day if there's no IT. And that's a hard number because you think there's a lot of pieces to that. But the point of the question was, then ask them, how many days can you be without IT before it's material, right? Where you cannot have a business anymore, where you start to function we're now in a fire sale now. And that kind of starts to roll into your number. You start, okay, if we have fines, it's going to cost X. If we lose the business, it's going to add, we lose Y. And then what does it cost? Then you can go to, there's so many incident response resources around the world, and this is not a name dropping exercise, but they can help you based on the number of systems, number of applications. They'll say you're out in your DR strategy, and your ransomware strategy. They can say, and if you get hit really hard, you can expect this to take, 10 days, 20 days, 50 days to get back. And we have an hourly rate and you have an hourly rate. And that's how you can bake in your number. But I think all of that is a swag. It's just, I have I have a swag I can justify, right? That's the way my father always said it. But it's at least something you can say logically, I came up with a number.
A really, really robust impact analysis would have to be done, right? To get the real number. I mean, that's a big effort. It's a big effort. And then it comes down to that, smoke jumpers that come in to help you from that forensic level of how much you're going to pay.
Right.
How long do they need?
How long do they need? And how long is it going to go off site? Because some of these, these smoke jumpers need, they could be on site for 4 months at $300-400 an hour. That's a big number, right? That was the one thing that I thought that was, how long can the business be without IT and still be a viable business at the end? And how much does it cost to actually do the incident from an AR and from an IR forensic partner? Just because it's another swag, right? Nobody actually knows what the real number is, and nobody tells you after the event, right? You don't get the largest payout ever was $27 trillion. Nobody that never gets published, right? So it's a matter of, okay, this is good enough for now. Please God, we never have to see it happen again. That's the kind of thing. If it happens, we'll find out if our math was right. So does that sound about close?
Yeah, absolutely. And the environment changes so fast. Like in a quarter, like it's like companies acquired someone, or you have a whole new. So your exposure is changing as well. So it's a ballpark to a large extent. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, absolutely. You're moving at the speed of business, to quote a terrible commercial. All right, we have a question from the group, and this is open to anybody who wants to chat. It's from Adam, and it says, at what point in the cyber insurance process has a company given consent to be scanned by third parties? I was never was asked.
Yeah,
Never.
I don't think we have control of that.
Adam, I think what you're hearing is all of us saying, this is something you're presenting yourself to the internet, right? It's the best example. This is the front of your house. Mm-hmm. And they just drove by and took a picture of it. You can't do anything to stop them. I hope that answers your question. So now let's get back to, I know we diverted back into getting it. Now let's talk about the operational side of it. And Derek, you were talking about where it has problems where it lives. I have a steadfast rule, and this is just my hand on heart. Everybody can take it for what it's worth. I state categorically that the insurance policy has to be owned by the GC. I'm going to explain why. If it has to be enacted, the GC is the only person that represents the company as a legal entity. And, if I enact it inappropriately, I'm acting as a non-legal agent of the firm. So my best practice is the first pass is to give it to GC and let them talk their way out of it. And they've been successful, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But it stays there. But the other part of it I wanted to talk about, I wanted to get both of your inputs on, was we all have our vendors, right? You have for your SIM and your SOC and your XDR, you name it, right? Well, all of those vendors, the first time I got my insurance, I didn't realize they have to be approved or their bills will never get paid. So do you factor that in when you look at software, or then have you found it difficult to get your vendors added to policies? It's open floor.
Well, usually it's going to be a shorter list that's going to be approved by that insurance company if you have to utilize those services, not having them in-house or having a vendor already exist. So I haven't seen that sort of difficulty because, gosh, I hope there would be a break glass situation where if you needed somebody that wasn't approved yet to come in and you could do quickly enough some sort of due diligence to let them come in. I hope there's some level of that, in and amongst maybe the leadership committee or the executive committee that could help with that.
How about you, Tez?
So I agree with the point that general counsel is the right place to own this because it's a legal, it's a contractual issue. I think that's the place. They're the best at dealing with some of these components that in my role I wouldn't understand, right? Like it probably changes by the state and the country and everything else.
Sure. Yeah.
They're the experts there. I'm one of the stakeholders. I add input to pieces that I consume, and that's how the relationship exists. Coming back to software and what can be consumed, I'm starting to see some trends where they're becoming more nitpicky around retainer, like incident, like forensic firms that you could use, or some of the retainers that you could have in place. It's almost like you could use a doctor in network or out of network kind of thing. So that's where we have some back and forth. I have some preferences based on historical context and experience. So we go back and forth on that a little bit. Not a lot.
Well, you took my joke. Unfortunately, I didn't know. It's a tough night on the stage. No, that's the way my experience has been. I found that, it's in system and out of system, and where we have an embedded partner for a specific service, and the opportunity cost of changing the partner has never. We like who they are. We like the service they do. We've become very dependent upon it, and the insurance company comes in and says, and they said, we do not. We'll pay 10 cents on the dollar on their bills if you have a breach. Otherwise, you have to go to one of my pre-approved lists. And that it truly changed. It was a conversation, and now it's a business conversation. It's not, I like this vendor and they do a great job. Now it's a business decision, and it's not a cyber. It's now talking. If the world blows up, are we looking at a huge liability because our insurance vendor's not going to cover this? I don't think no matter the amount of like Darrell has, he's going to keep that vendor in program. So my experience has been either they flat out will say no to a vendor, or they make it extremely. There's a lot of hoops to jump through to get them put into the plan. So that was one of the biggest impacts I saw, and that started about 2017, 2018, where they're like, we're only going to pay for these vendors. And it had a material impact on my cyber program, just that because of that. And that goes back to, it ties into one of the comments was, have you guys seen any effect of your cyber insurance program on your incident response plan, where they have requirements for training, or they have requirements for vendors, they have requirements for due diligence, I call it follow-ups, et cetera. Have you guys seen any of that?
On broad strokes, I have seen some of that, where they say, do you process payment information? Do you train your employees on cybersecurity, things like that? But it's probably going deeper now, where they would be like, do you train them 3 days within their onboarding? Things like that. Do you give access to systems before they're trained? It's getting like levels and levels deeper. I think that's where things are slowly heading to, given the new a breach a week right now, right?
So. Right, a breach a week. Love that. Took another joke. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, I'm seeing it like Teza sees it. It's the broad strokes there, but you can get a sense that who's helping the insurance company put these questions together has that acumen in that cyber area or that compliance area with maybe SOC 2, PCI, high trust. Right. You can see what's happening there. That there's somebody helping them with the right, security resources on their side that season, and that's what they're trying to do to drive down that darn risk to get the premiums to where they want them to be, and not where the customer would hope them to be.
Sure. So one of the questions that we brought up in our pre-planning was, in what cases can your insurance policy be used? I mean, what has been your experience? I'm sure we could say ransomware, so I'm going to take that one off the table. But what other instances have you guys encountered where you found that the insurance policy was really useful? Tez?
Yeah. So I think cyber insurance has gained popularity because of ransomware, right? That's a great use case. But this is where I think cyber leaders can really dive in and say, can I use it for internal fraud? It's not used for such cases, but those are certain cases where you could say, okay, there was some internal fraud. It was because we didn't have the right kind of authorization or access model in place, which is a security loophole, right?
Sure.
And that is where I think we could do a lot more. Talking from experience, but I cannot name the names. But yeah, that is one of the scenarios you could use, and broadly other things, right, around third parties and those scenarios as well. Yeah.
How about you, Derek? I have mine.
Yeah.
I'll let you go.
I remember recently we didn't have to actually use it, but we brought it up to the point where we were about to use it based on a situation where a financial institution had some impact from the SolarWinds incident. If you've heard of it, I don't know, guys, but it was queued up. Everything was ready to go. It was like we almost had all the soldiers ready to fight. And as we dug deeper and deeper and did more due diligence and asked questions to appropriate third parties that we had to stand down. But that was going to be a use case that we felt we'd be successful with, is trying to get what we could based off of a third party supply chain attack. I mean, how specific is that to call out in an insurance policy?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have an individual writer for that on every policy, right?
Yeah.
Well, my experience was somebody clicked on a phishing email. They were targeted because they were part of the wire transfer department. This actor started putting together false wires. He was caught. I mean, he was stopped, right? I should say he was never caught, right? Unfortunately. But it was stopped, but not after several thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been illegally wired. We made a claim, and we actually came to, it wasn't 100% payout. It became a partial payout. It was negotiation, but at least it wasn't the classic, it wasn't a classic ransomware attack or malware attack or anything like that. But it was, okay, they got in and they attacked us through phishing, and we showed due diligence we had all of our training, we have evidence of training, we do our own phishing campaigns. Someday somebody's going to click on a message. It is what it is. And it actually worked out very well for us in that end, right? So that was good news. But we've also had events, and again, speaking in a very guarded way, where we would put in, we had a internal fraud case that they denied, right? It all comes down to the different carriers. And to Derek's point, when they're like, well, what kind of conditions do we need to put in the contract? I mean, are we supposed to go through the OWASP top 25? I mean, that's not comedic. I mean, that's going to lead to my next question. If you guys had impact or input into what clauses are actually put into the insurance policy, have you guys been a part of that?
Yeah, I have. What we had to do was leverage our internal risk assessment that we did, and based off of that, I'm not 100%. Is it called the rider? I think it is.
Yeah, the rider.
Yes, where you start to bullet it out. We leveraged that because we did our own assessment internally and felt that these top 10 or 20 were in the appetite of what we wanted to cover. So we pushed back on that. That's still in process. I think it's going to take a while to come to an agreement because some are very specific in nature and some are just ransomware, right? But there's usually more to it than that. There's 10 sub-bullets under ransomware for how it occurred. So
exactly. It's a how, it's not a what. Right?
Yeah, it's too many. It's like eating at the Cheesecake Factory. There's too many items on the menu and you have to pick the one you want. So, hopefully that will come out. I'd like to see how that fares because it's in the client's hands now. But it was based off of an internal risk assessment that we did, the likelihood of what we felt we should include.
Great. How about you, Teza? Have you been a part of that?
Yes, and I'm a bit more diligent about those terms because I was hearing the scenario where a company had a significant breach, and before they were going to be paid out, the insurance firm hired a third party to come in and do an audit. Does this company have everything that they said the contract had? And the claim was denied with the reason that they did not have the right controls in place that was part of the original docket. So it's becoming, so it's both ways. We want to claim for everything and they want to deny us for things which are not relevant. So I'm a little bit more diligent now, having learned some cases like these about what I'm committing to, right? Because I want to be able to use it if things were really, touch wood, but I'm hoping,
That's great. So we're kind of coming up on we're wrapping up here, and I wanted to get some guidance from both of you, and then I'll give my 2 cents if it's unique in any way. What would be some of your best practices if you were having a lunch with a CISO who's just starting down? It's like, we're going to have to get cyber insurance. What would your top 5 watch out fors, and then what are your top 5 you better do's, right? Because those 2 things are very different lists, right? So I'll turn it over to you, Derek. What's your top 5 you better watch out, and 2 you better do this?
Yeah, I think you guys might agree with the top one is just walking through the story is go back. If you're starting as a CISO somewhere, you're taking over somebody, maybe your first time there, that they have this role. Go back and get last year's questionnaire or whenever the last renewal time was and see what was answered as yes that we do. And confirm the heck out of it that you
Great
do.
idea.
Right, Teza? You don't want to say yes to something and then have an audit come in and poof, all of it's gone. One bad apple could wreck the whole bunch. So I think going back and doing that kind of pre-state assessment and then getting your current state assessment done. What we're seeing is real, hot topics for the cyber insurance company to push on is are you patching right? Are you patching appropriately? Is the cadence correct? Is it happening at the right speed it should? And are you keeping eyes on your systems externally, looking from outside in and making sure that those are in place and training your people? You just said that phishing attempt that came in and wire fraud began. It's train. The weakest spot we all know is our people. So if we have to shore up that more, and probably bottom of the list too would probably be in and around, not that it's less important, but in and around your third party and your vendor management. It's time to get on board. Everyone's talking about it. Put it in place. Start to do it. Ask for help. There's people out there like all of us that can come in and help you take care of that and put the eye drops in and read the right reports that you need to understand what the heck is happening with your third party and your vendors.
Great. So I asked the same question to you, Teza. What's your top 5 watch out for and your top 5 you better do?
Yeah. So there could be companies which don't even have a cyber insurance. So a new cybersecurity leader could get in, and they would. That's a great topic to start a great relationship with your legal team and your general counsel. Is do we have cyber insurance? They love such stuff. Trust me, they love it. Right? Every time you do something which mitigates risks, they are usually your good partners. So it's a great conversation topic. Happened at one of my former companies, so I bring it up. So you could be in a scenario where there is no insurance, so you start from ground zero, right? Or you are in a situation where there is something, as Derek mentioned, you have to go back and see, okay, what was this thought through the right way, or was it more of a checkbox exercise that let's get some insurance and put it in some shelf? So thinking through, the next step is, what are those key things? Do I have freedom to work with incident retainers that I want to? How deep does this go into? Does this give me coverage around my third party, fourth party vendors? How much are they asking us to do in the first? Because there's a parallel track where CISOs are building out the program. So you got to make sure that it kind of matches up with the insurance terms and conditions that are in there. So those become my key pieces, right? And sometimes you may be better off avoiding those detailed questionnaires, at least in your first year. Take a simple approach, get something in place, and then you go deeper as the program evolves.
Got it.
Yeah.
So my 5 and 5, right? And it's great that we all do the same thing, and we're all doing things a little different, right? I like this. I like this a lot. My 5 watch out fors are the rider clauses. Spend time looking at those. And if you don't understand them, if you don't read contract law and insurance forms for a living, sit down with a GC or an associate GC and have them explain things to you. Because the language is designed not to pay. And that's very important. Just because it says ransomware support, that really means here's all the different ways. We're not going to support a ransomware attack claim. And so those are a big deal, especially when you go back and start assessing your program, because those could all be risks and you don't know. So that would be my first gotcha. My second gotcha is the vendor list, which you mentioned too, Teza, which is, we had some very strong partnerships that when we got our insurance vendor, they said, no, they're too expensive or they're outside of our jurisdictions. They had reasons for it. And we're not saying that it was unjust, but it was just, they said no. So you have to make a business decision. Third is cyber doesn't own cyber insurance. That's a gotcha. Because the first 2 times around, I owned it. And the third time around, I didn't know. once bitten, well, twice bitten, once shy, right? So I was like, this has to go to the council because they're the only people who deal in this methodology every day. It'd be like somebody from the network team coming and doing app support, perhaps app security. It's not that they're in intelligence; it's just not a skill set that they use every day. The fourth one, and I think, and this may sound a little out there, but it's not, and that is, how much are the premiums? That is a big deal. And because just because you were able to, and this is hand on heart, I've lived this, you're able to pass a questionnaire with vendor A with flying colors, but you read the riders and they're not going to pay you. And then another one is, and the premiums were low. And then you can't pass a questionnaire with another one. The premiums are lower. But you can't, but it's a matter of now you're in negotiation, right? Are you going to give us half until we do X and then we get full, et cetera? So that premium discussion is absolutely paramount to success. If you don't do it, it's a classic, if you're signing a contract without reading it, the shame is on the buyer, right? So the other part that I take full, or this is, starting the things you should do. And I'm hoping this is like churning up some ideas where you go, yeah, you should do this too. Maybe you should do that. Is every one of those DDQ questions, my GRC teams use as a control, right? Every one of them. And it's like, okay, and are we failing? Are we passing? It goes onto the register. How do we mitigate it? And we manage it, right? It just becomes a risk that we have to manage. Mm-hmm. And my GRC team owns those DDQs. Right? That's it, just like they do for third party, right? And that's why we're able to start building up this database of what our answers are. I loved your idea of going back to last year's answer and go, I'm sure there's a couple, you guys have done it, as I know I have. I've looked at past DDQs for insurance and it's like, what clown said yes to this? It's like, we don't do that. Where did this come from? And that actually leads me to my last, you better do it, is when you come in, you have to find out who filled out the previous DDQs. Have you guys had an experience where, legal filled out the DDQ, or compliance filled out the DDQ, and they talk to somebody and they talk to somebody in ISO? Yeah, we have DLP. Oh yeah, we patch. But then you look at it and you're like, there's a lot of. Have you guys had this problem? Have you seen it?
Yes, I have. Yeah, for sure. It's like. Some founding engineer filled it who says yes to everything, right? So yeah, those could be issues. And then you're looking at it from more end to end. Does this work or not? And you're like, no. So that's where, that's an exercise where you have to true up to what's really there and not.
Got it.
Yeah, absolutely. I came into one. It was kind of comical. They checked the box that they were PCI compliant. They don't take one card payment anywhere. It's not even something they've ever had to do. You're PCI compliant. It says yes right here. You're going to be held to that.
Well, I guess you can say they are compliant. That it's not applicable, right?
Not applicable, right? Yeah. NA.
So we do have a great question from Julie, and is for small business owners or nonprofit orgs, should they purchase cyber insurance or just take the risk by using SaaS apps for their business? Please advise. First one to speak with.
Yes, Julie, go get cyber insurance. How much can the business take on? Again, you'll have to do that assessment, that impact analysis to come to that conclusion, but get something. I've seen some creative ways that people can cover different holes that may be in their existing insurance, almost like that gap insurance you get for your car. Mm-hmm. We can go to another company and kind of get something that they'll take care of this couple of instances, and they're not very expensive. But it's an impact analysis you'd have to do.
Got it. How about you, Teza?
I would definitely agree with Derek. Yeah, please get it. It's almost like identity theft insurance that we get for our own personal accounts, right? But the other thing is, even if you use SaaS applications, you're still the data owner for everything that sits with your SaaS applications. So the liability is still on you to make sure the customer records that you collect are safe and secure. And SaaS applications definitely try their best, but they have moments of breaches as well. So that's where this is going to help you kind of cover up if something comes back to you.
And both my colleagues I'm in 100% agreement, and they're 100% correct, Julie. The only thing I would add is it is something of a business decision, and I liked how you're talking about now. It's a risk acceptance, risk mitigation exercise. If you don't, and I've worked with small companies where they're just buying this insurance means we can't do something else. I mean, it's literally they're managing their money like that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think there's one small piece of value here that should be taken advantage of, even if you're working on shoestring budget, is go and apply. Get them to give you the DDQs, go through the questionnaire and learn how much risk is really in your organization. Like Teza said, you can't transfer data security responsibility to a SaaS platform. I always make the example of just because I bought a Bentley doesn't make me a good driver. And just because I bought a Chevy doesn't make me a bad one, right? Just because it's expensive doesn't make it, you can still use it inappropriately and do bad things with it. But you find out the diligence part of this cannot be, I guess what's the language I'm looking for, can't be stressed enough, is I actually appreciate, as a customer of insurance companies, the fact that they are becoming far more prescriptive about what they want to know about you. Because, and I'm going to ask this question to both my colleagues, when you've gone through the due diligence questionnaires, is it anything that you haven't already seen done professionally in your career? Is it anything new?
Not usually, no. It like you just said, it's a great way to take advantage of a quick and dirty gap analysis on what you need to put in place.
Right.
And it's a great way to leverage it.
How about you, Teza?
Agree completely. I think they are drawing from similar frameworks that we use for our risk assessment exercises. So they're getting closer to using some of the things that we have in place. So it's
right.
It's nothing, out of the whack that they want. Yeah.
Well, my experience has been there's nothing on those due diligence questionnaires that we haven't seen in an ISO standard or NIST standard or CISA or CIS. We've seen it all, and we've probably reported it. I know my experience was, this is, how can we have this problem? I can't believe it. Well, we've known about it for years. I've been reporting it for years. But now that it came and now it says an insurance company's name on it and not my name, it has a whole new level of validity, even though it's exactly the same problem. And I got traction to get things done. I really enjoyed that. So I just got noticed we have 8 minutes. So and we've kind of done a little wrap up, and we've got some questions from the part floor. But if you guys, anybody on the floor, anybody online have any other questions, please feel free to send them over. You're never going to get a better opportunity to sit down with 3 people who've done this for this long and can war story for hours and hours on end. So ask any question you want. So one of the items that came up on our question was best practices for submitting a claim once an incident occurs. And this is really, when do you engage? What's your experience with engaging with your insurance broker when you're having an incident? So I'll turn it over. I picked on Teza to start a few times. I'll turn it on to you, Derek. What's your best practice for, okay, the world has gone pear-shaped. We know it, we validated it as pear-shaped. How do you, when, where, how do you engage? Or, yeah.
A lot of my clients in most of my background financial institutions. So we have that really robust business continuity plan kind of meshed now with incident response plan. So we have those triggers. But what we've noticed is a little gap there on when to bring in the owner of the cyber insurance policy to go reference when we have to make that trigger. So now what we've come across in our at the end, what we've learned is to get that engagement up front and try to make that part of that first layer of reacting to the problem. Make sure it's out there and everyone has access to it, because the rest of the group is going to go about and do their job. And now we need the cybersecurity insurance to do their job. So earliest as possible. And that's from a financial institution background. They're very proactive when it comes to keeping continuity, especially banks and credit unions. So having that cyber insurance ready and available at the front is starting to become a big trend.
Excellent. How about you, Teza?
So we established some pieces that we can trigger right when we think an incident or something needs to be investigated, where like we say, okay, we're going to get these retainer firms to come in and do some research and help us. Because of GDPR, there's a 72-hour window, which is critical for us to make sure the regulators know if there was really something that has to be reported, right? So usually we have some of those clauses set with the provider saying we're going to do these, and it's kind of like aligned from that standpoint. And once the mayhem of the incident is over, that's when we bring in and start the whole process. So that's only to keep the team kind of like focused, and we can give accurate details of what's happening as well, right?
So my experience has been truly two sides of the same coin. And that is, I'm sure all of us have robust incident response programs that have, executive level engagement, executive level management, including that up to the GC, et cetera, right? We all know that, you can't call it an incident because it's a legal word of art. Only the GC can. So it would, that's just, everything's an event until the GC says it's not, right? And so I've had it work out both ways. One, when part of our plan was the minute they called it an incident, now everything goes to privilege. They engage with the insurance agent, right? The insurance of the carrier. They're sitting at the table with us, working through the problem, not really doing anything. Let's just be honest here. They're flies on the wall, but they're there and they're doing something. Now, and most of the time they're advising the GC. Hey, ask this. Hey, what about that? Right? And that's not a joke. That literally happened. It happened in both of those. Now, here's why I said it's two sides of the same coin. At the end of one of those incidents, got a grade A response from the insurance agent. We had every piece of evidence they needed. We had everything lined out because they were right there, lockstep with us all the way. At the end, we filed our claim, and we're done. We go into recovery mode, take a breath, go see the family, manage it. The other side of the coin was same scenario, different company. Insurance agent was coaching the GC to ask question A and ask question B and collect evidence this and collect evidence that. And at the end, they were like, oh, you know what? You guys gave us this and you guys gave us that. And because of that, you didn't meet the terms of the contract and we're not going to pay. Trust me, I did not go home and rest and see the family at that point, right? And because if I'm not mistaken, we're the ones driving the incident response plan, right? We're the ones that has to have these people, and I liked how you said everybody's got a part to play, right? It's like, the insurance agent, and we found out that he was working in malfeasance, right? He was not working in good intent. So what I have grown to know is the following. We will engage through the GC when they call privilege, and we will call them back at some point. They're not on every phone call. They're not requesting data. They're not doing all of that. We will call them back when the world is no longer pear-shaped. Everything's back to normal. And then we'll say, this is everything we did and everything how we did it. And in many cases, we'll even have performed our own audit against it. And I have this, and this is one thing I was going to wrap up with. We've got 3 minutes. And that was my biggest takeaway from going through this so many times is before you should have an audit if you have the capability to be audited against your cyber insurance policy. And it's not the DDQ. The DDQ is on the front end, right? And their scans are on the front end. But have somebody come in and cost you a couple $1,000s and say, and insurance agents will do this. I did not realize this. That will, okay, give me your insurance policy. I'm going to act like I'm not going to pay you. Do you do this? And do you do this? Did you do this? And I have found to have huge impact and small incremental changes in the incident response plan, in the patching cadence, and all of it. Just by having somebody else come in and pseudo audit your insurance policy as the provider. And when it wasn't, and they do it almost pro bono. You're going to pay for, I was going to pay for a little bit of the time, only because you have to pay for it. Nothing in life is free.
Yeah.
And they also want the business, right? They want to become your provider when it comes up for renewal, and they want, it's a carrot. But that was, and again, it was these small incremental changes in business process, in IR and comms, just so that when we did go to make a submission, we were very comfortable we were going to be successful. And we have like 2 minutes left. Derek, why don't you give us a minute wrap up on, again, your best, what you think a great takeaway from today would be?
Yeah, it kind of plays off what you just said, Darrell. How great would that be for small to mid-sized businesses to leverage that policy as their cybersecurity framework and find those gaps and get help to shore them up? That's a huge takeaway. You know what's not in place, but if someone comes in, a third party tells you, you have to prove to me that you have that in place. Go ahead and try to do that, and I'll say if it's right or wrong, or you're close. And I think that's just a big one. But again, I just say, do the right things in cybersecurity. There's so many websites out there that can give you the top 10 items to put in place to help mitigate the risk or drive down your insurance premiums. Reach out to the people that do it all the time too. There's a lot of people just like us that are out there that will help. That's a big takeaway, I think, is don't try to do it all on your own. There are pros out there that can help.
That's great. Thank you very much, Derek. Teza, what would be your wrap-up takeaway from this?
Yeah, I need to use a cyber agent trick that you just mentioned. I'm gonna get my insurance audited. That's a takeaway for me, right? Great trick.
Oh yeah.
But overall, I think, yes, echoing a lot of stuff that Derek and you mentioned, cyber insurance, absolutely. If you don't have it, please, that's going to be more paramount in today's threat and ransomware world. So get it. How you right size it is going to be the trick of the trade,
right? So
that your premiums are not killing you, right? So make sure you speak to the right expert who can guide you and say, okay, this is the right size of insurance based on your exposure and your customers and everything else. So
that's great. My wrap up is it's very simple. This is just another tool in the box, guys, and to use it for what it is, a voice on the table, which is, I mentioned this before. We've done our own assessments. We know what our soft parts are. We've probably reported them to somebody. Now have the insurance agency report it to you because it has a whole different validity. That's one takeaway. Second takeaway is don't own it. I can't stress that enough. You do not own this. This is something you cannot do well unless you're legally trained, and most of us are not. And the third takeaway I really believe is the most important is you've got to spend some time with your GC and go through the writer. And I think that's table stakes. Honestly, if you get to that point and you get to that level of table stakes, you're in a pretty good place. And then everything else we also talked about, like auditing them and et cetera, that's going, you know, what is it on the scale of 0 to 5? Now you're going into the 4 range, right? But that's really it. So, hey guys, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I think it was helpful. Some of the comments have been great. I know I've learned something here. Kim and team, thank you enough for having us. And I hope this was useful to the audience.